Have you ever sat alone, looking into the mirror, and quietly asked yourself, who am I? Not the name printed on your passport, not the job title you put on your LinkedIn profile, not the role you carry like second skin, parent, manager, provider, achiever, caretaker, but you, the person beneath all that. The one who existed before the world started handing out roles and expectations. Maybe you're a mother constantly worried about your children, a father who carries the unspoken weight of keeping everything together, an employee who smiles even when you're breaking inside, a partner who tries to stay strong, just so the other person doesn't fall apart. And day after day, you wear these roles like uniforms, tailored not by choice, but by habit, by culture, by fear. But if one day, all those roles were taken from you, who would be left? If you no longer had to be someone for someone else, would you even recognize yourself? This question unsettles many, and so we avoid it. We go on performing, rehearsing the lines society wrote for us, believing that's what being an adult, a good person, a functioning member of society looks like. You were taught to succeed, to behave, to be responsible, to live in a way that makes others proud. And somewhere along the way, you may have become so good at performing that you forgot how to live. You may laugh at the right times, say the right things, play the right part, but still feel a quiet ache inside, a hollow space no applause can fill. You are loved, perhaps, respected, needed, but are you seen? You keep smiling, you keep going, and all the while, something inside you grows quieter until it no longer even dares to speak. Maybe you feel it too, that longing to take the mask off, to stop having to perform, to stop being the version of yourself that the world applauds, but your soul doesn't recognize. Maybe you crave to just be, to exhale, to not always have to hold everything together. This video isn't asking you to throw away your responsibilities or your relationships. It isn't here to shame your roles. Being a mother, a leader, a partner, a teacher, a caregiver, those things matter deeply, but they are not the whole of you. You existed before the world told you who to be, and you're still there, underneath it all. So let this be an invitation, not to escape your life, but to awaken inside it, to gently question the script you've been handed, to ask, with courage, if I didn't have to play any role today, who would I choose to be? Because there is a life that's not about performing, it's about living. And it begins the moment you remember who you are beneath the roles. Are you truly living, or just playing the role society handed you? Part 1. If one day you didn't have to be anyone, would you know who you are? 1. If one day you didn't have to be anyone, would you know who you are? One quiet morning in the French countryside, a woman named Marianne, 52 years old, sat alone in the kitchen where she'd prepared meals for over 25 years. The ceramic plates on the wall, the smell of toasted bread, the ticking clock, everything felt familiar, yet suddenly strange. That day, her youngest son had moved to another city. The house fell silent. There were no more breakfasts to prepare, no school runs, no laundry piles to sort. She was no longer needed as the ever-busy mother. And in that stillness, a question rose in her mind. If I'm no longer a mother, no longer a wife, no longer a homemaker, then who am I? You might not have experienced that exact moment, but the feeling of being lost in your own life is probably not foreign. When all the roles are stripped away, or when you simply pause for a moment and stop performing, it's possible that you, too, will hear that question echoing inside. We often live as though our identity is made up of roles. Someone's child, someone's partner, a professional title, a label. And we believe that if we play those roles well, we'll be accepted, loved, and worthy. But very few ever stop to ask, if all those labels were removed, what would be left? In Boston, a man named Daniel used to be the creative director of a major advertising firm. He lived on business-class flights, negotiated in glass boardrooms, made million-dollar decisions. But after a health scare, he quit and moved to a small coastal town. No longer a boss, no longer the successful man. We spend our lives building ourselves around roles, and then forget how to exist without them. From the time we were children, we've been trained to enter the theater of society. Kids are praised for being obedient. Teenagers are pushed to be high achievers. Adults are admired for being successful, stable, respectable. One role after another is handed to us, along with applause and expectations. And somewhere along the way, a successful woman may forget what freedom feels like when she doesn't have to prove anything. A dutiful son may never truly know what he wants, only what his parents hoped for him. The question, "Who am I if I don't have to be anyone?" sounds simple, but it is one of the most profound questions a human being can ask. It doesn't offer quick answers. In fact, it often comes when we lose something central to how we define ourselves: a job, a relationship, a sense of youth, a role we held for decades. Or maybe it appears during a restless night, when success feels hollow and even your own reflection feels like a stranger. But if you're brave enough not to look away, to truly stop and listen, you'll begin to touch something deeper. You may discover that beneath all those layers, there's a version of you that has never truly been lived. One that doesn't need to be the best, or perfect, or endlessly responsible. One that doesn't need to earn its right to exist. It just is. And sometimes, that's the most beautiful thing of all. So if you're feeling unsteady right now, these masks stop being choices. They become scripts. We play them so well that we forget we're playing at all. But beneath each of those polished roles is often a silent ache. The wife who never raised her voice. The mother who never put herself first. At a women's retreat, after sharing her story, she looked around the room and said, almost in disbelief, "I don't know if I've ever lived a day just for myself." The silence that followed wasn't judgment, it was recognition. So many nodded through tears. They knew that feeling all too well. Because the world rewards masks. The mother who sacrifices everything is called noble. The leader who never shows weakness is called strong. The person who agrees, adapts, accommodates, they're called easy to love. But slowly, quietly, the self begins to disappear. Not out of malice, but out of habit. The truth is, we often confuse role with worth. We believe that to be loved, we must be useful. To be respected, we must be impressive. To be accepted, we must be agreeable. And so we craft a public self, tailored, edited, refined. Not because we are fake, but because we are afraid. Afraid of being too much, or not enough. Afraid that who we are, raw and unpolished, won't be enough for this world. But there comes a moment, and it arrives differently for everyone, when the performance starts to crack. For some, it's burnout. For others, it's a sudden loss, a divorce, a firing, a child leaving home. And for many, it's an inner fatigue, a quiet rebellion of the soul saying, "I can't keep doing this." And when that happens, there is often grief. Or the peacekeeper, or the high achiever. But here's the hidden gift. When a mask falls away, what's left might finally be you. Not the version shaped by fear or pressure, but the real, beating, breathing you, with messy thoughts, unresolved questions, raw hopes. The one who maybe wants to rest, or start over, or say no, or cry, or laugh too loudly, or change careers, or finally ask for help. This journey isn't about abandoning responsibility. It's about remembering that you're more than the roles you've mastered. It's about realizing that being good doesn't have to mean being invisible. That being strong doesn't have to mean being silent. In a society obsessed with appearance, success, and fitting in, choosing authenticity is a quiet revolution. And it doesn't require a dramatic escape, just small acts of honesty. Saying what you actually feel, admitting when you're tired, questioning the things you've always done, giving yourself permission to not have it all together. So here's a question to sit with. What mask have you worn for so long that you forgot it wasn't your face? If you can answer that, even a little, you're already closer to coming home to yourself. And that, not perfection, not performance, is the beginning of true freedom. 1.3 When the script of your life was written by someone else, and you didn't even know it. When she was 9, Olivia, a little girl growing up in the suburbs of Stockholm, was praised for folding her clothes neatly for the first time. "You're the best girl in the house," her mother exclaimed. Her face lit up with joy, but in that moment, something else took root beneath her smile. To be loved, I have to please others. Olivia's story is not rare. Across the world, in every culture, we grow up surrounded by unspoken messages. They slip through the expectations in our parents' eyes, through the tight smiles of teachers, through applause or quiet disapproval from the people around us. Gradually, we begin to write the script of our life, not from our own dreams, but from the roles others believe suit us. Have you ever asked yourself, why did I choose this path? Why do I constantly feel like I have to prove something? even when no one's asking. The answers usually don't lie in the present, but in distant moments, moments when you were too young to realize you were stepping onto a lifelong stage. In Boston, I once attended a 10-day meditation retreat with people from all over the world. On the sixth night, during a sharing circle, a man named Marcus, a lawyer in his 50s, neatly dressed, suddenly broke down in tears. He said, "I never wanted to be a lawyer. I just wanted to paint. But my father once told me, art won't feed you." So I became what he wanted. 30 years. And I can't even remember the last time I was happy. Marcus's story might sound tragic, but in truth, it's painfully common. Most of us live out borrowed stories. We carry others' expectations like an invisible inheritance from our parents, teachers, families, society, sometimes even the identity of a nation. Messages like, "Real men don't cry. A good woman sacrifices. You have to excel to succeed. This career matters. You must be useful." These words sound noble until they become shackles for a soul longing for something else. And strangely, it's not only the adults who shape these roles. Sometimes, it's the child within us, desperate for love and approval, who willingly chooses to perform. Because in childhood, we can't yet tell the difference between conditional love and unconditional love. We believe that if we're not good enough, not pleasing enough, not perfect enough, we won't be loved. So as adults, a woman in her 30s constantly feels the need to be responsible for everyone else because she was once praised for being the model eldest sister. We don't even realize we're performing. Waking up doesn't mean rejecting every social value or turning away from your parents. It means having the courage to look within and ask, whose values am I living by? Where did they come from? Do they still feel true to me now? And if the answer is no, then you have the right and the power to rewrite that script. No one can force you to live as a replica of someone else. No one, not even those who gave you life, can live your life for you. But only when you stop living the script written by others can you begin writing the story of your own. 1.4 When the self is swallowed and life becomes just a list of roles. Her name is Sarah. She's 37, living in the suburbs of Ontario, Canada. A wife, a mother of two, and an administrative worker at an insurance firm. From the outside, her life looks entirely stable. Every morning, she prepares breakfast for her husband and kids, drives to the office, meets her deadlines, returns home, cooks dinner, tucks the kids into bed, and repeats. But one night, Sarah shared her experience on Reddit with a haunting opening. "I no longer know who I am." The response was overwhelming. Thousands related. A mother from Scotland commented, "I understand. I've been a devoted nurse and a model mom for 15 years. One day, my husband asked me, 'What do you like most about yourself?' And I couldn't answer." A man from New York admitted that after working 20 years in finance, earning well, sending both kids to college, he still felt like he was playing the role of a successful man. The kind person, the one who has it all together, and we learn to perform well. But no one teaches us how to simply be ourselves. Even more insidiously, society doesn't force us directly, but you will be quietly erased. So, over time, to avoid feeling alienated, we wear the masks that make us acceptable. We call it maturity, responsibility, being realistic. But deep down, because it had been so long since she had simply sat still, not performing any role. She said it was the first time in nearly 15 years that she felt something like herself. "I realized I'm still here. I'm not gone. I've just been drowned." Stories like Sarah's aren't rare. They're mirrors for countless people in modern society, where roles are praised and the self is sidelined. We wear polished clothes, say the right things, manage our image, smile on cue, suppress ourselves in public, all to be praised and accepted. But inside, many of us are slowly losing touch with the most authentic part of who we are. The problem isn't that you're a mother, a wife, an employee. The problem begins when those roles become your entire identity, leaving no room for anything else. It's terrifying to realize that some people go their entire lives without ever asking, "Am I living authentically, or just performing very convincingly?" And often, that question only surfaces when they've reached burnout, depression, or a deep personal crisis. The good news is, who had taught at university for over 2 decades. In the classroom, Leon was an inspiration, wise, composed, admired by students. But in an old journal he had written in as a student, a person may be a brilliant doctor, but that doesn't mean they are living authentically. A CEO may be a powerful leader, but that doesn't mean he doesn't secretly crave a quieter, simpler life. Role is like a costume we put on each day to fit the situation, to meet others' expectations. Roles are necessary. They help the world function. But the problem begins when we mistake these roles for the self, the essence of who we really are. That's when we start to lose the most precious thing we have, inner freedom. When someone asks, "Who are you?" most of us answer with roles. I'm a lawyer. I'm a mother of two. I'm a technical manager. These things may be true, but they are what we do, not who we are. Like an actor playing a king on stage, it doesn't make him royalty off stage. The man who used to love playing guitar, who used to read poetry. I began again from there. The point isn't that roles are bad. Roles help us grow. They allow us to contribute. They let us be useful. But they cannot replace our deeper self, something far vaster than any title. A role is a vehicle, not the destination. A cloak, not the skin. The real question isn't, am I doing well in my role? It's, am I confusing my role with who I truly am? When we begin to separate role from self, something profound happens. We stop fearing the loss of our role. Because we know the origins of the false self, how family, school, the workplace, and social media shape who you think you are. When a child is born, it carries no titles, no professions, no political views, and no notion of good or bad. It simply exists, a pure being, present without needing to prove anything to the world. But after only a few years immersed in social life, when parents say things like, boys must be strong, girls should be well-behaved, or, in this family, weakness is not tolerated, they're not just offering guidance. They are creating invisible molds. A little boy might be discouraged from expressing his emotions because crying is weak, and grow into a man disconnected from his feelings. A little girl might be expected to always be nurturing and agreeable, losing the ability to speak hard truths when it matters. Family is not always the source of oppression, but it is often the first place where the seeds of the social self are sown. Then comes school, a place where children are assessed, ranked, rewarded, or reprimanded. A good student is one who obeys, memorizes, and conforms. Creative or questioning children who challenge norms at the wrong time are often labeled as troublemakers. When a child realizes their worth is tied to grades, approval from teachers, or fitting in with the group, they slowly learn to bend themselves into shape. And the true self, curious, bold, even rebellious, begins to get buried. The workplace and adult life are simply larger stages, where masks become uniforms. You're not just an employee, you're the reliable one, the professional, the selfless team player. People often trade their youth, passions, and even integrity to maintain an image of success that fits the organization's mold. Happiness, effort, kindness, depth, as long as it's presented in the right way. Someone might wake up feeling completely empty, yet post a smiling photo with an inspiring caption and receive hundreds of likes. The desire to be validated becomes addictive. Gradually, they stop living and start performing a version of themselves that the audience wants to see. None of these structures, family, school, the workplace, or social media, are inherently bad. They are part of human life and can even offer value at different points. The problem arises when people forget that what they are expressing is a role, not their essence. When someone begins to believe, this is who I am, instead of this is the role I'm playing, they lose their freedom to choose. And so, the social self, even if shaped by good intentions or discipline, becomes a cage for the authentic self. A man may spend his whole life trying to prove he is strong enough, just because his father once called him weak. A woman may fulfill every expectation placed on her, only to realize at 50 that she never lived for herself. They are not to blame. They simply never realized their life script was written by someone else, piece by piece, over time. The social self does not arise from within you. It is the sum of thousands of voices, hundreds of gazes, and countless expectations you've encountered on your way to adulthood. It is not you, but if you don't wake up to that truth, it will steer your entire life without your awareness. And perhaps, the question to ask is not, how am I living, but rather, Whose life am I living? 2.3. After giving birth to her second child, Elena began to feel adrift. Her husband, Mark, was a software engineer who traveled frequently for work. She left her job to become a full-time caregiver for their two young children, a 4-year-old boy and a toddler girl. Each day blurred into the next, making breakfast, cleaning the house, playing with the kids, doing laundry, cooking dinner, reading bedtime stories, and collapsing from exhaustion. Whenever she wanted a moment to herself, guilt would flood her mind. Was now filled with stretchy clothes designed for comfort, for caretaking. No one had forced this on Elena. Elena had a panic attack one morning while preparing breakfast. That was the breaking point. She finally accepted that she was suffering from depression, not because of her children or her husband, but because she had forgotten who she was before becoming mom. She began therapy. In sessions with her psychologist, Elena confessed that she had always believed loving your children meant sacrificing everything else. But slowly, about sleepless nights, about breakdowns followed by silent tears while holding her child. A year later, she launched a blog called Mother, Not Machine, where she shared the raw, unfiltered truth of rediscovering herself behind the illusion of perfection. Elena's blog resonated deeply. Thousands of women across the world wrote to her, saying they too believed they had to sacrifice their entire identity to be a good mom, only to realize they were slowly vanishing inside. Elena never returned to architecture, but she began painting again. She wrote. She picked up her camera, this time to photograph herself, not just her children. She taught her kids that their mom was a whole person too, with dreams, passions, and the right to simply be. The role of mother is not a bad one. But when it becomes your entire identity, when a woman is allowed to be nothing else but mom, it's no longer love, it becomes a form of self-erasure. Elena's story is a gentle but powerful reminder. If you're living a role that everyone praises but deep down you feel like you're quietly disappearing, maybe it's time to pause. Because you weren't born to play a part, no matter how noble it may seem. 2.4. Are you wearing the mask, or is the mask wearing you? In Florence, Italy, a city of art, beauty, and history, there's a small, old theater called Teatro del Silenzio. There, a mask artist named Luca Moretti creates exquisite masks for classical performances. When asked why he was so passionate about making masks, Luca simply said, "Because a mask lets you enter a role, but only if you remember you're not the role itself." That answer, seemingly simple. Many of us lose ourselves because we forget that the mask should come off when the performance ends. We are born into this world without roles. A newborn has no titles, not a CEO, not a teacher, not a lover, parent, artist, or employee. We simply are, pure, undefined, and limitless. But as we grow, society hands us masks to wear. Some are useful, some are burdensome, some are beautiful, but they leave no space for the real skin underneath to breathe. Being a parent is a role. Being a leader is a role. Being a devoted partner, a good son or daughter, a high-achieving worker, these are all roles. And they're not bad. On the contrary, when used wisely, roles help the world function. They let us connect, contribute, and take responsibility. But the problem begins when we confuse the role with the self, when the mask becomes glued to our face and we forget there was ever a person underneath. Imagine a doctor who starts to believe he must be the doctor at all times. He hides his vulnerability because doctors are supposed to be strong. He refuses to apologize to his wife because success means never appearing weak. He distances himself from his children, believing discipline is more important than emotional connection. In the end, he becomes a shell, a never-ending performance, and the real human inside is lost. Or consider a young woman who devotes her entire life to being the perfect daughter. She gives up her dreams to avoid disappointing her parents. She agrees to an arranged marriage to preserve her family's image. She endures verbal abuse from her husband in silence. Because a good daughter never causes trouble. She's no longer living, she's acting. Roles are not the enemy. But when we let our roles control us, rather than us controlling the roles, we surrender our authentic selves to our social identities. You can be a mother and still be an artist. You can be a CEO and still cry, be unsure, and say, "I don't know." You can be a partner and still keep your individuality, your dreams, your freedom. Roles should never become cages. At best, they are coats. You wear them when needed, and take them off when they no longer serve. In Japan's traditional no theater, performers wear masks throughout the play. But before exiting the stage, they bow deeply and remove the mask. This is more than a ritual. It's a message. I live this role fully, but I am not this role. So the real question for you at any stage in life is not, what role am I playing? But, do I remember it's only a role? When you truly understand that roles are tools, not your essence, you begin to live with more lightness, honesty, and depth. Because when the mask finally comes off, the real you can finally breathe. Part 3. The ego, the root behind every role we play. 3.1. The ego wasn't born with you. It grows from fear and the craving for approval. At a psychology and leadership seminar in Copenhagen, Dr. Eva Holmgren, a renowned expert in self-awareness studies, opened her talk with a simple question. Who are you? Without your name, profession, gender, age, or any social title. The room fell silent. No one could answer. And from within that silence, she smiled gently and said, then we've just started to touch the truth of the ego. The ego is not something we are born with. It is not part of the soul, nor is it some ultimate truth about who we are. The ego is a construct formed over time, shaped by external factors, social expectations, comparisons, praise and criticism, and the fear of rejection. Just look at a child. They don't care how they look, whether they're more loved than others, or what school they'll go to tomorrow. They cry when they're sad, laugh when they're happy. Be different, and you're mocked. That's when the first mask forms, and the ego begins to take shape. At a high school in Toronto, a Korean-Canadian student named Daniel Kim once said in a speech, I used to believe I was only worthy when I was top of the class. Only then did my parents smile with pride. For Daniel, grades weren't just achievements. They were symbols of his value as a human being. This is the essence of ego. It's not who we really are, but a persona we build to be accepted. Ego is made up of three main elements. Fear of rejection, criticism, not being enough. Desire for recognition, superiority. Control, comparison, needing to be better than others to feel worthy. The ego operates in duality, having or lacking, winning or losing, being above or beneath. And for that reason, it never allows us to feel truly at peace. A person who achieves success fears losing it. A person who feels loved fears being replaced. Ego survives on insecurity, and the more we feed it, the more it takes us away from our true nature. A German philosophy professor, Clara Stein, once wrote, the ego does not know how to love. It only knows how to possess. That's why in relationships, ego breeds demands, jealousy, manipulation, and pain, because the ego cannot allow others to leave, nor admit that it can be wrong or vulnerable. At a tech company in San Francisco, Ava Renshaw, a 34-year-old product director, shared in an interview, I spent 10 years climbing the ladder to power and title. But when the company restructured and I was demoted, I completely collapsed. Not because of the job, but because I didn't know who I was without that title. That's the moment many people realize they haven't truly been living, but merely protecting an idealized image of who they thought they needed to be. Ego builds walls to prevent others from seeing the fragile parts inside. But the tragedy is, the stronger the ego, the lonelier we become. Because no one can truly reach the person behind that wall, not even ourselves. Those who walk the Buddhist path often describe the ego as an illusion. It has form and shadow, but when we try to grasp it, it vanishes. In the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha said, see this body as a bubble, the mind as a flash of lightning. That doesn't mean denying the self, but realizing that all roles, all identities, are just tools, not the truth of who we are. Only by understanding how ego is formed can we begin to release it with compassion, not by rejecting ourselves, but by returning to the present, where we no longer need to play any role. And that is the first doorway to inner freedom, where life is no longer about becoming someone, but simply being. 3.2. When roles feed the ego, and the ego clings to the role. At a small cafe in Vienna, an elderly man named Lucas Meinhardt shows up every Sunday morning. He's a retired philosophy professor who once taught at Heidelberg University, known for his deep lectures on identity and the ego. In a casual conversation, he once said, I no longer know who I am without being Professor Lucas. What unsettled me most after retiring wasn't the empty time. It was the emptiness inside. Lucas isn't alone. Many people, regardless of success, have experienced that moment when a role fades and panic sets in because we no longer know what's left of ourselves. It's because ego and role constantly feed one another, like two sides of a coin that can't be separated. When a person steps into a role, as a parent, a leader, a doctor, a celebrity, not only does society begin to see them through that lens, but they themselves begin to identify with it. The role becomes a kind of armor, something that earns respect, affection, attention. And once we get used to that validation, the ego begins to attach. It fears being stripped. It fears becoming invisible. In Chicago, a former Broadway actress named Naomi Fielding once shared her story of life after the spotlight. When there were no more characters to become, I suddenly felt erased from the world. People still said hello, but their eyes were different. I realized, for decades, I lived through the skin of roles, but never truly met myself. Naomi's story raises a profound question. When you live too long in a role, can you still tell where the mask ends and you begin? The ego is masterful at forming emotional bonds with roles. When we're praised as the perfect mom, the brave leader, the beloved teacher, the ego holds on to those words like medals of honor. It starts to fear losing them. So we brace ourselves to maintain that image, even when we're falling apart inside. In Tokyo, a surgeon named Hiroshi Tanaka told a story about why he left medicine. Every time I entered the operating room, I felt like a hero. But after my son took his life because I was too busy to hear him, I realized I had become a character and forgotten I was human. When roles become our sole identity, other parts of ourselves get abandoned. Emotions, vulnerability, sorrow, all the deeply human aspects, are labeled inappropriate for the role, without needing any role to hold you up. 3.3. When the title disappeared, and I no longer knew who I was. New York, autumn 2019. A man stepped out of the glass headquarters of one of the world's leading tech companies. In his hands, he carried a small box containing a few personal items, a Montblanc pen, a family photo, and a crystal award engraved with the words, CEO of the Year, 2016. His name was Ethan Walsh. And on that overcast morning, after more than 2 decades of service, he was no longer the CEO. To the media, it was just another executive shuffle. But to Ethan, it felt like the ground had collapsed beneath him. On his business card, he had once been CEO of Virion Tech. But deep inside, Ethan had lived as though he was the business card itself. When the title was taken away, he didn't just lose a position. He lost the very identity he had spent 25 years constructing. Ethan came from a working-class family in Boston. His father was a mechanic, his mother a night shift nurse. From a young age, Ethan vowed, "I won't live an ordinary life." He excelled in school, graduated from Harvard Business School, and by the age of 38, had become the youngest CEO in Virion's history. But alongside his accomplishments, something else had quietly grown. A few underwhelming growth numbers, some controversial policies. And just like that, the board appointed a new CEO. No scandal, no misconduct, just the rules of the game changing, and Ethan no longer fitting the script. In the first week after stepping down, Ethan told himself it was a chance to rest. But as the phone stopped ringing, a simple question, yet one he had never learned how to answer. He stopped sleeping, lost his appetite, felt useless. In conversations with his wife, he found nothing to say, except to reminisce about past achievements. He avoided friends, declined every new opportunity. Whenever he looked back, all he could see was a man standing atop a podium of success. And now, all he saw was a void. Months later, Ethan enrolled in a silent meditation retreat at a small monastery in California. No one there called him CEO. No one cared who he had been. In the silence, for the first time, he had to face the voice within, the one he'd ignored for decades. An elderly monk said to him, "We often mistake the role for the self. But when the stage goes dark, we realize we never truly knew who we were." Ethan wept like a child, not because he missed the chair, but because for all those years, he had never once asked, "What do I really live for? Am I truly happy? Have I ever lived as a human being, or only as a symbol?" When he returned, Ethan began to write. Not about business, but about loss, identity, and rediscovery. He shared the silence, the sleepless nights, and the first moment he sat alone and wasn't afraid. In our modern world, more and more people shatter when the roles they've worn like masks for a lifetime suddenly fall away. The question, who am I, if I am no longer what I used to be, has become a haunting echo of our age. And to understand the ego, that illusory and often overpowering self, we must look through three lenses: Buddhism, Western psychology, and existential philosophy. 1. Buddhism. The ego is an illusion without inherent substance. According to Buddhist teachings, what we call the self, Atta or Atman, does not exist independently. From a Buddhist perspective, identifying with social roles as a parent, CEO, artist, celebrity is a form of self-attachment, ego clinging. It leads to suffering because all such roles are impermanent. When the role disappears, the ego collapses with it. This is why the Buddha emphasized that liberation doesn't come from building oneself up, but from seeing clearly the impermanent, non-self nature of all phenomena. When we stop clinging to the illusion of identity, we become capable of living freely, with true mindfulness and compassion. 2. Western psychology. The ego is a psychological structure, malleable, and deeper truths. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It returns through dreams, breakdowns, or sudden crises. Psychology doesn't deny the ego, but it warns, unless we observe, integrate. The ego is a project, one we must build through freedom and anxiety. Existential philosophy, with figures like Kierkegaard, Heidegger, and Sartre, does not see the self as something given. We fall into bad faith, living through roles, like the character Antoine Roquenin in Nausea, who realizes the absurdity and artificiality of all societal masks. For existentialists, the ego is not something to protect, but something to question and transcend. You are not a CEO, not a parent, not a lover, not a doctor, not an artist. You are a conscious being. And that comes with a massive responsibility to live truthfully, mindfully, and meaningfully. When three traditions converge, shining a light on the ego. Buddhism helps us deconstruct the ego, to see it as an illusion and root of suffering. Psychology helps us understand the mechanics of the ego, recognizing trauma, imbalance, and the denied parts of ourselves. Existentialism returns freedom to the self, urging us to step beyond roles and live as conscious, courageous beings. The first step to awakening is not trying to become better or more somebody, but to step back, be still, and ask, can I live without needing to become anyone at all, and simply be? Part 4. A devoted elementary school teacher and the wife of a well-established lawyer. For nearly 2 decades, her life followed a strict schedule, mornings spent taking the kids to school, days teaching in class, evenings preparing dinner and cleaning up. Weekends were for visiting her in-laws. Christmas was always with her side of the family, Easter with his. Everything was orderly. They can become the very prisons that confine our inner being. Roles are not inherently bad. In fact, they help give structure to life and enable us to relate to society. But the problem begins when we completely identify with our roles, when they become synonymous with me. That's when the inner self begins to shrink. The freedom that naturally resides in consciousness, the ability to create, to change, to choose, to hear the voice within, is gradually replaced by duty, expectation, and the repetitive patterns of performance. In psychology, this phenomenon is known as role engulfment, where a person becomes so immersed in a role that other aspects of their identity are overshadowed. A father forgets he once dreamed of being a poet. A wife loses touch with the part of her that longed to travel, explore, or just sit in stillness. A CEO no longer knows what vulnerability feels like, because the role demands strength, decisiveness, infallibility. Along with each role comes a set of rigid expectations. A good mother must sacrifice. Real men don't cry. A strong leader never wavers. Teachers must always be perfect. These invisible standards create relentless pressure, driving people to perform the image that the role demands, rather than living in authenticity. A Harvard study revealed that individuals who juggled multiple social roles without carving out time for themselves, even just a few hours a week to do something they genuinely enjoyed, had 40% HIG, her stress and anxiety levels than others. The problem wasn't just the weight of the roles, but the absence of inner space to return to. Worse still, when a role is stripped away through retirement, job loss, the death of a loved one, or divorce, people often fall into an identity crisis. They no longer know who they are or how to live without their previous title. A woman whose children have grown and left home may feel crushing emptiness, having lived solely as a mother, and pass away, like everything else in the cosmos. Clinging to these roles as me is a source of suffering. The Buddha taught, whatever is born will die. Whatever comes together will fall apart. Do not cling to any form, even the form you call yourself. During a Vipassana retreat in Thailand, an American businessman named Richard broke down in tears on the 6th day of silence. It wasn't because of the leg pain or lack of a phone, but because, for the first time in his life, he saw himself not as a CEO, not as a father, not as a successful man, but simply as a breathing, feeling, sometimes confused, sometimes clear human being. And he realized, the roles he once believed were his armor had actually been his prison for 30 years. Roles are necessary, but they should not become the core of who we think we are. One can be a mother, a boss, a teacher, and still remain a human being with an inner world, with dreams, with a yearning to awaken, with the right to silence and the freedom not to know. Inner freedom doesn't require us to abandon all roles. It comes when we're no longer consumed by them, held up as role models. They fulfill the role of the obedient child, the ideal employee, the responsible parent. But if you ask them, are you truly happy? Their eyes dim, and their answer catches in their throat. They've been living for the role, not for the soul. Frederick, a 50-year-old German-American, was a senior executive at a financial firm in New York. On paper, his life looked perfect: top-tier education, a beautiful wife, well-mannered kids, a suburban home with a perfectly manicured lawn, and a shiny SUV. But one autumn afternoon, after a major board meeting, Frederick didn't return home. He drove aimlessly across boroughs, eventually parking in a quiet park, where he sat in silence until midnight. This became a pattern over the following weeks. Finally, in a therapy session, he confessed he no longer felt alive. He was merely performing the roles others expected of him: a composed CEO, a kind husband, a respectable citizen. But deep inside, he felt hollow, disconnected from himself. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd laughed freely. Across both Western and Eastern cultures, children are raised on templates of success: be smart, polite, strong, independent, responsible. These are not wrong, but they become golden cages. As they grow up, many lose track of their inner voice, drowned in echoes of who they're supposed to be. Clara, a primary school teacher in Toronto, was beloved by students, respected by colleagues, and trusted by parents. But behind her ever-smiling eyes was a woman quietly battling depression and chronic insomnia. She once confided, "I can't allow myself to take a break. I don't even know who I am anymore outside of this perfect teacher persona. If I drop the act, will anyone still care who I really am?" Her question reveals a universal fear. This fear keeps many of us clinging to roles long after they stop serving us, even as they deplete us, because we're terrified of facing our unlabeled, vulnerable selves. Social media amplifies this even more. Online, we must constantly present our best selves: the ever-loving mom, the tireless entrepreneur, the endlessly motivated leader. The pressure to maintain this idealized image turns many into characters rather than real people. And when a role breaks, through a layoff, a divorce, or public criticism, our entire identity often collapses with it. But we are not our roles. Roles are temporary, fluid, and replaceable. The soul is what remains when all the titles fade away. Instead of asking, "Am I performing this role well enough?" perhaps we should ask, "Is this role nurturing who I truly am? Am I still living in alignment with my heart?" When you dare to live from the soul, not just the role, you begin to taste a deeper kind of freedom. Freedom from expectations, freedom from masks. And from that space, life unfolds in a way that is more honest, more tender, and more deeply fulfilling than ever before. 4.3. Elena's story, the silent cost of being the good daughter-in-law. Elena Vargas got married at the age of 23 in a traditional ceremony held in a small village in southern Spain. Her husband, Miguel, was the only son in a prestigious and deeply conservative family. From the moment Elena said, "I do," she knew she wasn't just marrying a man. She was marrying into a family, a legacy, and an unspoken set of expectations about what it meant to be a proper wife. From the very first day she stepped into her new home, Elena began to set aside her personal habits and preferences. She learned to cook the way her mother-in-law liked, adjusted her style of dress to align with her in-laws' conservative tastes, and gradually distanced herself from her former friends, afraid of being seen as immature or irresponsible. Every decision, from how meals were prepared to how the home was decorated, from how the children were raised to what holidays were celebrated, was filtered through the lens of what the family expected, never through what Elena desired. For nearly 3 decades, Elena never raised her voice, never protested, and never said no. She cared for her ailing mother-in-law, raised 2 children with unwavering devotion, and stood quietly behind Miguel as he advanced in his career. To the outside world, she was the epitome of grace, an ideal wife, a selfless mother, a pillar of the family. But behind closed doors, Elena had never once asked herself, "Am I living my own life?" She had played her role so flawlessly that she had forgotten there was a person beneath the mask. When her mother-in-law passed away and her children moved out to start their own lives, Elena entered her 50s with a vast emptiness blooming inside her. Each morning, she awoke to a house that no longer needed her sacrifices, and for the first time, she realized no one truly knew her, not even herself. One winter afternoon, Miguel came home to find Elena sitting silently on the balcony, tears slipping down her cheeks. When he asked her what was wrong, she responded with just one sentence, "I don't know who I am anymore." Miguel was confused, hurt, even. In his mind, Elena had always been the perfect wife, quiet, supportive, never demanding. He couldn't understand how the woman he believed to be content could now seem so hollow. But how could he understand when Elena herself had never been allowed to? For so many years, she had lived to fulfill a role, to never disappoint, to be praised as the good daughter-in-law, the ideal wife, the devoted mother. And with each compliment, the role grew tighter around her like a noose. From a psychological perspective, Elena's story is a classic case of self-erasure in the name of social expectation, where the self is gradually sacrificed to maintain a facade that pleases others. People trapped in this pattern are not allowed to express anger, to say no, or to live authentically, because they fear being labeled selfish or ungrateful. But the suppressed self doesn't disappear. It festers, buried beneath layers of performance, until one day it erupts like a tidal wave, shattering the very persona that was once held together with such care. And a long-buried dream of becoming a teacher. The pieces of her identity that had once been silenced were, at last, given names and space to breathe. She shared, "I don't blame anyone for having expectations of me, but I mourn the years I spent being so good that I forgot how to be real." Elena's story is far from unique. All around the world. And the deepest tragedy is not that others forget them, but that they forget themselves. What's truly terrifying is not failing in the eyes of others. This is the role you must play. Yet the older we get, the more we find ourselves squeezed into invisible molds, not because they reflect the truth of who we are, but because they represent what others expect from us. Our families expect us to be dutiful children. Society wants us to be successful and competent. Friends want us to be fun and agreeable. And partners want us to be gentle, but not weak. And so, we begin to shrink, adjust, and contort ourselves, not to live authentically, but to fit into the picture others have painted for us. What makes it more deceptive is that these roles often carry a moral, virtuous tone. Who would criticize someone for being self-sacrificing, always thinking of others, or never causing trouble? Yet it's precisely through such praise that we become trapped. Once we're seen as strong, we're not allowed to be vulnerable. Once we're known as reliable, we're not allowed to feel tired or want to let go. These seemingly positive labels quietly become prisons, locking away our inner freedom. Modern psychology calls this phenomenon self-alienation, the state of being estranged from one's own self. It happens when a person feels they're living a life that doesn't belong to them. Acting. You wake up and realize you no longer know what you like, what you believe in, or how you truly want to live. In Buddhism, this issue is illuminated by the concept of anatta, or non-self. We often take the constructed self, formed by societal expectations, and use it as the foundation for our lives. And from that comes suffering. We try to live up to a self that was never truly ours. A man who always pretends to be strong because his father once told him, "Real men don't cry." That's expectation, not truth. We stop living honestly. We stop choosing differently, out of fear of shattering the image others have of us. And slowly, we ourselves begin to believe in that image, until we forget who we truly are beneath it. There's a simple yet revealing psychological exercise. List 5 things you regularly do, and ask yourself, do I do this because I truly want to, or because I believe it's expected of me? The answers may surprise you. Living in the mold of expectations isn't necessarily a wrong life, but it's a life that lacks freedom. Have you ever sat alone, looking into the mirror, and quietly asked yourself, who am I? Not the name printed on your passport, not the job title you put on your LinkedIn profile, not the role you carry like second skin, parent, manager, provider, achiever, caretaker, but you, the person beneath all that. The one who existed before the world started handing out roles and expectations. Maybe you're a mother constantly worried about your children, a father who carries the unspoken weight of keeping everything together, an employee who smiles even when you're breaking inside, a partner who tries to stay strong, just so the other person doesn't fall apart. And day after day, you wear these roles like uniforms, tailored not by choice, but by habit, by culture, by fear. But if one day, all those roles were taken from you, who would be left? If you no longer had to be someone for someone else, would you even recognize yourself?